it's been a long conference, but we're almost there. I'm Henry Hill, the Deputy Editor of Conservative Vote, and I'm delighted to invite you to this, the latest of our annual In Conversations, held in partnership with UK and a Changing Europe. We've been doing these things since 2016. They've always been absolutely fascinating. Somehow we've not run out of things to talk about, and I'm sure that we won't. On the panel is Professor Anand Menon and, of course, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary. The format should be familiar to you, but also hello to the people on the live stream who I almost forgot to welcome. They'd have felt very left out. The format should be very familiar to you. The two panelists will have a conversation. I think at some point this is going to be thrown open to questions from the audience. If it is, I won't be here to shout at you then, so please obey the usual rules. No statements, short questions to allow more people to... Oh, I almost beat Steve Bray, but I didn't. Short questions to allow more people to speak. That's it from me. I'm now going to hand over to Anand. I hope this is a hugely enjoyable event, and I will see you all later. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, the Foreign Secretary has offered to rap along with Steve Bray in the background outside, so it'll be something to look forward to. Before we kick off, James, I just thought, on a personal note, I know your wife's been unwell, and I just want to say how delighted we are that she seems to be making it for me. Is she here? Oh, excellent. Well, we're very, very happy to you. I think you could probably afford to be tuning in cousins even in politics every now and again.
Yeah, look, thank you. And my lovely, the gorgeous Mrs. C, as some of you know her, is here front row. So I wasn't nervous, now I'm nervous.
And the other bit of good news I had for you is that at the Tory conference last year, we did this session with the Foreign Secretary, and she went on to do rather well. So you're making all the right moves. Anyway, just to kick us off, how have you found the conference this year?
Musical. Absolutely on key. The background music starts. I love conference. I'm an incredibly political animal, and I make no apology about that. And this is kind of like the gathering of a clan. This is the family get together. This is the closest thing that the Conservative Party has to one of those big family weddings. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And I've always enjoyed meeting up with people from all different parts of the UK, Conservatives from all different parts of the UK, people that you only see once a year. Staying up too late, drinking too much, just being amongst family, and I love it, and I've really, really enjoyed this, and the fact that I'm doing it as Foreign Secretary with a musical accompaniment is better still.
I mean, honestly, have you been to many weddings where everyone's slagging off everyone else? I mean, this is a...
I mean, this isn't like a real wedding because no one's started a fight yet. Although, still got a day and a half.
It's going to be difficult for the Prime Minister, isn't it, to push through her agenda, given the fact that the party is so obviously so divided on so many of her key policy areas.
Look, anyone that becomes Prime Minister thinking the job is going to be easy is doing it wrong. And look, this is a really, really challenging set of circumstances, domestically, internationally. So of course it's a tough job. But look, I'm biased. I lay my cards out on the table here. I've known Liz for a long time. I regard her as a good friend, as well as a good colleague. And I know that she is very determined, she's very, very smart, she's very focused, she knows her own mind, and I know that she has got a really good mix of attributes for what is a very, very tough time. There's no point pretending it's not going to be tough, but as I say, if you're waiting for the world to become an easy, benign place, you're going to be waiting a really, really long time, and she's hit the ground running. She's been very, 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 very clear on what her agenda is. International in nature, pro-growth in philosophy, and I can totally buy into that.
Cool. Okay. Talking about the world, I want to spend most of our time talking about foreign policy.
Good. I know.
I want to start with the integrated review. So you're reviewing the integrated review. Can you share with us your thoughts as to which bits are most in need of updating or rewriting?
So look, it's not. So we put the integrated review forward, and there were a number of elements to it. Now, obviously, since that was published, we've seen Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It would be a nonsense for us to pretend an event of that magnitude had no ripple effect on the wider UK foreign policy. But the fundamentals of the integrated review remain absolutely sound about building, coalitions of like-minded countries, about making sure we build connections, not just in our near neighbourhood, but across the Atlantic and of course into the Indo-Pacific. My first set of bilateral trips was to Japan, Korea, and Singapore, and I made a speech in Singapore saying the Indo-Pacific is here to stay, that we are investing time and energy in that. So the foundation stones of the integrated review, absolutely solid and sound, but when something of this magnitude has happened, you can't just pretend that it hasn't. So that's why we're going to be putting a kind of an update forward to the integrated review. But one of the things I have no doubt you will see is that the foundations of what we discussed and decided when it was released have remained right. We got it right, we called it right.
And actually, one of the foreign policy issues that came up during the leadership contest was China, relations with China. Do you think we should be willing to sacrifice some of our economic relationship with China because we see them now more as an adversary than as a collaborator?
So China is a large, wealthy, growing, influential player. And those are realities, and we have to recognise those realities. We also have to recognise that increasingly some of China's behaviour is unacceptable. Its treatment of its minorities within its own country, its treatment of the people of Hong Kong, its attitudes towards the rules and norms of the international world, its respect or lack of respect for IP. These are things that you can't ignore, and we cannot, must not, will not sacrifice our core values in pursuit of short-term, and I think at best it would be only short-term economic advantage, because there's a number of countries I've seen around the world that have become economically dependent on their relationship with China. That kind of free money, that no strings attached money, always comes with strings attached. So we have got to make sure that we are in a position where we can protect the things that we value, economically and philosophically. I think the world would much prefer to see China moving in a better direction, and it's their choice to do so. And that's what we're going to continue working on, but ultimately we are not going to sacrifice our principles for a quick buck.
Are you the kind of foreign secretary that is attracted by the sort of vision thing? I mean, I'm old enough to remember us having an ethical foreign policy way back when. Is that kind of idea appealing to you, that you attach foreign policy to values as well as interests very explicitly?
Yeah, you have to. You have to be values-based. You have to be pragmatic, of course, and there is always an economic imperative. But ultimately, if you don't demonstrate an adherence to your own values, how can you then champion those values overseas? How can I, with any credibility, visit a country that perhaps we're trying to bring into those conversations? So we have to live our values, both domestically and internationally, and we should, then be able to promote our values on the world stage. And I think we should be courageous enough to promote our values, because we believe our values are the right values, and therefore we should be evangelical about that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to kind of walk the walk as well as talking the talk.
I mean, I want to apologise for the sort of inevitable follow-up then, which is, does that mean we have to rethink our relations with Saudi?
No, because this is about being a driver of change in the world. We have agency. We're not passive. We're not just sitting there watching. We are making a difference. And look, there are things about our relationship with Saudi that I have been critical of. I've had those conversations with the Saudis. We also got to recognise actually that Saudi has gone through a massive social and economic reform program. And the choice that we have, not the choice, the question we should ask ourselves is, do we want to have a degree of influence with this partner? Do we want to steer them in a direction that we think is to our mutual benefit and for the greater benefit of the globe? Or do we want to disconnect? Do we want to unplug the relationship and watch what I think will be the inevitable byproduct of that is they'll drift in a worse direction. Okay. So it's our job and duty and role on the international stage to try and encourage our partners, new partners and long-standing partners alike, to move in a direction that we genuinely believe is for our mutual and global benefit.
Now, I assume the government's going to keep using the slogan of Global Britain. Can I just ask you what you mean when you say that phrase? What is Global Britain to you?
So for me, Global Britain is about... Let me pause. When I did my maiden speech, my first speech to the House of Commons, there was a line in it, and I paraphrased myself because I haven't checked Hansard recently. But I said something along the lines of, Britain is at its best when we are a globally focused trading nation. So we're a small bit of rock hanging around off the northwest coast of the European continent. But we are a global language. We have a huge degree of soft power. We're one of the largest economies in the world. We were a founding member of the United Nations, of NATO. We are a globally engaged player. And again, it's about these simple choices that sometimes you have to ask out loud. Do we want to remain globally engaged? Do we want to be influential? Do we want to be a rainmaker? Do we want to be the driver of the world that we think is the best version of the future? Or do we want to be introspective, to kind of fall back within our own borders and to be kind of a self-interested isolationist nation? We never have been in the past, so I don't see why we should pursue that agenda now, moving into the future. So we are a global player. We should always recognise we're global. We should lean into it.
Would you agree that the combination of things like COVID, perhaps Brexit to an extent, the war in Ukraine, have meant that actually there's farm trains? Is that what you're saying?
Apparently so.
Right.
And then what happened? I looked at Liam Fox, and Liam Fox was talking about. He was writing books about water scarcity, about resource scarcity, about China's positioning on the world stage, and I always got really well with Liam. And I watched, and he was a senior player in the party, but there was this kind of rather like, oh yeah, that's Liam, crazy Liam with his like foreign affairs thing that he does, and his insistence that we should work with our friends and allies around the world, including the Americans. Funny Liam and his funny little ideas. Meanwhile, let's talk about trains. And I'm like, I'm over here with Liam, and it really matters. And my observation doesn't stop just because you don't pay attention. And I think that's the big lesson in the last couple of decades, and I'm really glad now that our relationship with the world is something that people genuinely now do talk about in the pub and on the Clapham omnibus and wherever else people have conversations about stuff, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, and clearly Ukraine is front and centre there. Does the Foreign Office think the tide has turned decisively in favour of the Ukrainians in the war? What is the assessment?
Well, it's certain, I don't know. I hope so, but I think it would be foolish to start making predictions about an ongoing conflict. So rather than make predictions, I'll make some observations. The Russian army has been fighting a very unsophisticated conflict. And if anything, it's almost a kind of an early 20th century style of conflict. Mass amounts of troops, big kind of heavy armoured push forward on a ridiculously overly ambitious scale, trying to fight a kind of a multi-front conflict. The Ukrainians, and look, I'm going to claim a bit of credit for the Ministry of Defence and the UK, because we have helped them with this, are fighting a much more modern and sophisticated conflict. And so we're disciplined, focused, and the Russians are low morale trainings. Their success, and I'll mention this in my speech later on today, and I don't want to steal my own thunder, but they have to be successful. It is in our collective interest to ensure they are successful. Because if we don't make sure they are successful, the message we are sending out to every would-be dictator around the world is, if you cut up rough, we'll eventually kind of give up and go home. Mm-hmm. That is not a message that we can afford to send.
And what cannon should we be doing to help them over the months to come, to help support Ukraine? I mean, there's the military stuff, obviously. I mean, I've noticed in the US there's been some talk of eye-watering sums of economic aid that they want to see going there. Is that something we're in a position to offer and will be offering?
So look, every country that's supportive of Ukraine has done so in its own way. We've been very, very decisive in our military support. So we've given both equipment support and a lot of training support. And as I say, I think what we've seen is a much more effective professional Ukrainian armed forces, in part because of that. We've given anti-tank missiles, which have become almost legendary in their effectiveness. We've also, of course, given financial support. America, of course, is a massive economy, and their ability to kind of add zeros onto the end of the support they give is one of the things that they're doing. But the fact is that they are really, really putting their shoulder to the wheel. We are seeing some of our European friends and neighbours. Germany has largely rewritten its foreign policy since the middle of February. That's massively to their credit. We see, Turkey making sure, working with others and the EU to make sure we're able, to make sure the Ukrainians are able to export their grain. Eastern European countries absorbing significant numbers of refugees. So everyone's leaning in and helping in their own way. One of the things that the UK is doing and will continue to do very, very hard is to make sure we maintain that international coalition of support. There are countries in the global south who are going hungry because of Russia's attempts to block grain exports. We need to help explain why this is Putin's use of hunger as political and international leverage, not as a byproduct of our response to his aggression. That's a piece of work that we will be doing with others. So, everybody is helping in the way that they can best deploy to help. And it's not just the Ukrainians win the war against Russia. It is about defending freedom, about defending sovereignty, about reinforcing the importance of the UN Charter. The stakes genuinely could not be higher than this.
Is there more we can and should be doing via our foreign policy, either together with our partners or not, that would help wean us and the West in general off Russian gas? Are there foreign policy steps we will be taking? Yes,
there are short, medium, and long-term things. I mean, the Chancellor announced last week the short-term, the immediate response to energy price shocks here in the UK, helping people as we head into the water winter pay their electricity bills, their fuel bills. Fuel bills which have gone up in significant part because of the invasion of Ukraine. That's the kind of the immediate response. Or medium-term response is to help countries across the continent wean themselves off the immediate need for Russian gas supplies. And a number of European countries have moved very, very quickly on that. And we've been working with the energy-producing countries around the world, talking about volumes of supply to try and offset the squeeze. And then into the medium to longer term, we're looking at alternative sources of energy generation, whether that be wind and solar or small modular nuclear reactors. And you've got to do all those things because we can never allow ourselves, the big lesson I think we take from this, we can never allow ourselves to be so heavily reliant reliant on such an unpredictable and volatile source of a key product for our economies.
It's a contrast between the way European governments have approached this question of trying to limit demand and what's happening in this country. There seems to be a willful refusal here.
You know, a few weeks ago, the only story in town was how high energy bills are going to be. And I think a lot of people, that triggered in a lot of people's minds thinking about how they might save energy, about what they could do. And that thinking won't just vanish. And I think people do understand that energy supplies have been put under real pressure because of Russia's actions. I think people will instinctively know that, you know, whilst we've limited the price increases, that actually energy is a valuable resource and should be treated accordingly. And minimising wastage is always a good idea, whether that be food waste, energy waste, whatever. It's always a good idea to minimise waste. Waste, by definition, is wasteful. So let's minimise waste, and that is as true of our domestic and industrial energy use as it is anywhere else.
Okay. Turning to our nearer neighbours, the Europeans. I mean, we've got this summit, the European Political Community Summit, coming up on Thursday, is it the 8th? I'm losing track of days in party conference season. What do you make of this idea, European Political Community? What do you think President Macron wants it to do, and what do you think it could do?
Well, let's look at it with open eyes. I think one of the things that has really struck me since the Russian invasion into Ukraine is how much we have pulled together as an international community. I think Putin was determined to fracture the EU, fracture NATO, fracture the G7. And actually what we've seen is all those institutions become closer and work, I think, more effectively. So once again, Putin's strategic aims are massively undermined. So let's go into it with open eyes. Let's see what we can do. There's, I think, recognising that there is more to Europe than the EU. The EU is an important institution within Europe as a continent, but Europe as a continent is, by definition, more than the EU. And I think having European countries finding ways to work together, whether with mutual security, economic security, etc., that's certainly something that we'll go into with open eyes.
I mean, do we need another grouping? I mean, we've got NATO, we've got the European Union. I mean, there are various European institutions around. What is the gap that the European political community will fill?
Well, I don't want to kind of slope shoulders too much, but that's something that we need to explore. France has put this forward. If they're saying actually they perceive there to be a need for a new kind of a grouping, then, as I say, we'll go into that with an open mind. We want to find ways of working well with our neighbours and partners and friends in Europe. And so, as I say, we're willing to explore what this can do and how this can add value to our relationships.
Well, you've mentioned France, so I've got to do it. President Macron, friend or foe?
Well, I had a lovely conversation with him on the eve of Her Majesty, late Majesty the Queen's funeral. Susie and I were in Buckingham Palace, and we were coming up the grand staircase just as he and his wife arrived. So we walked up the staircase together, and we had a very friendly chat. And I said to him that the comments he made about Her late Majesty were absolutely pitch perfect, and it showed a real understanding of our country's relationship to Her late Majesty and Her late Majesty's relationship with the world. So he seems to have really got the mood music absolutely right at that point. Very friendly conversation.
I mean, talking of mood music, King Charles is making his first foreign trip to France. Should we read lots into that?
Well, look, I think France, of course, we shared a royal family for quite some time, us and the French. They're our near neighbours. I've got two boys, and there's perhaps a degree of sibling rivalry. I think our proximity sometimes generates friction, but ultimately what we've seen what we've seen on plenty of occasions, not just because of Ukraine, plenty of occasions, that despite perhaps our unique ability to rub each other up the wrong way at times, actually we do have a real ability to kind of pull together and work very collaboratively when needs be. So I have no doubt that we will find ways of working brilliantly closely with France. I have no doubt we'll find ways of having blazing rows with France, because that's what the Brits and the French do. It's our thing. Because that's our
Now, I mean, one of the
contribution to the world.
one of the debates that has been reignited to an extent by the war in Ukraine is the debate about sort of NATO versus the EU defence. Is the British government supportive of EU efforts to do more in the defence sphere, or do you see that as a threat to NATO?
So NATO, the UK's long-standing position, and it's not going to change on my watch, is that NATO is the foundation stone for the Euro-Atlantic, for the defence of the Euro-Atlantic. Again, so I was at NATO headquarters. I was at the NATO-Russia Council when Russian representatives sat there and basically said to us they had no intention of invading Ukraine. This was all paranoia on our part, and actually, if anything, we were the aggressors because NATO's eastern boundary had shifted eastwards over time. We know now, of course, in fact we knew it then, that they were lying about that. So NATO is the foundation stone for our defence. European countries finding ways of working more closely together, I don't inherently think there's anything wrong with that. But ultimately, NATO is where we really come together as allies in Europe and the North Atlantic. And when I was in Singapore, I gave a speech about maps and globes, and this is a classic. This is a really important example of why globes are better than maps. Okay, because you look at a nice flat map of the world, and you look at the Eurozone. You look at Europe over here in the middle of the map. So imagine I'm the map, you're looking at me. So there's us in the middle of the map, and over there in the corner of the map, there's America. Yeah? And of course on the globe, you look down from the globe, and there's us clustered around the top of the sphere. And we are close partners. And guess who else is at the top of that sphere? Big long coastline with Russia. So you look down at the globe from above, and you see why it's so important that the Euro-Atlantic, American, North America defence mechanism is so very, very key. And if you talk to any of our Scandinavian or Baltic partners, they will tell you, they will remind you what their near neighbourhood is and where the risks come from. So Europe without America is an incomplete picture.
Okay, but I mean, we know what the state of politics is in the United States. We know that they've got a presidential election coming up. It is conceivable that you'll get another Republican candidate who is either Donald Trump or has views like Donald Trump. Does that mean that we really should work more closely with our European partners on security and defence as a hedge against that eventuality?
No, I don't think. I don't think it's the right thing to do. Look, and again, the implicit in that question, and please don't take this as a criticism, but implicit. Actually, you take it. I'll take it. Take it a shot. All right. Implicit in the question is this kind of rather corrosive seed that we are not, that we don't have agency in this. So your question can imply, well, if America peels off on its own, should we respond this way?
Yeah.
I'm not here to watch and comment upon global events. We are here to influence global events. And part of our role will be to make sure that America does not peel off. Yeah? So we don't just sit there and watch it happen and then hedge or mitigate or whatever. Our job is to make sure we keep that defence alliance together, because it matters. Because as I said, take America out of the picture is incomplete. So we've got to keep America in the picture. That's why I'm so very, very pleased that Sweden and Finland are going to be joining the NATO alliance, because again, it's creating a more complete defence picture on that top bit of the globe. I've just come from the other bit of the globe, and there's a whole piece of work there about creating strong alliances and defence cooperation. That's why AUKUS is so very, very important, because it's not just about the top bit of the globe or the bottom bit of the globe, if you can look at it from the southern hemisphere, or the Greenwich Meridian or the international dateline. You've got to look at all these places. That's what being Global Britain is about. That's what being a proactive global player is all about. And that's what we're going to do as part of the UK foreign policy.
Excellent. I'm afraid we've got to do this briefly and talk about Northern Ireland and the protocol. How was your first meeting with Maros Sefcovic?
It was good. It wasn't my first meeting. It was my first.
As Foreign Secretary.
It's the first meeting with him as Foreign Secretary. I met him a couple of times previously when I was working with Liz on the similar thing. I got on very well with him. I got on very well with him first time when I met him, and the call went well. I think ultimately the Commission and the UK want the same thing. The route that we get there, we might have disagreement on, but ultimately we want the same thing. We want a good relationship. We want free and easy trade. We want to protect the Belfast Good Friday agreement, and we want to see the institutions of Northern Ireland back up and running. Now, I was very clear with him. We've got the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill going through the Houses of Parliament. That will progress at the rate that it progresses. If we're able to get a negotiated settlement before that becomes law, that's great. But there are things that we absolutely have to address. We have to address them, and we do so in a spirit of good faith. We want this to work. We want our relationship to the EU, with the EU, to work, and absolutely the foundation stone is we want to protect the integration, the integrity of the United Kingdom and the peace and security in Northern Ireland. And those things are absolutely bedrock.
Is one of the things we have to address the role of the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland? Is that still an issue for this British government?
So look, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to start kind of negotiating by proxy here at the table. But the fact of that is we've been very, very clear about the areas that we feel are integral to the integrity of the UK as a single market, and a constant reminder that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It's there on the front of the box, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And we are not going to put that last bit in parenthesis. It is an integral part of our country, and we want to always be able to treat it as an integral part of our country, because that's what it is.
But the European Union is making it clear that if the protocol bill becomes law, they will see that as grounds for retaliation. Is this really the moment to be risking a trade war?
So that bill is going through the House because there are things that have to be resolved. It's not posturing, it's not about political leverage or any of that kind of stuff. There are things that have got to be resolved. They can either be resolved through negotiation, which is our preferred option, or they have to be resolved through a change in legislation. But they have got to be resolved. Of course, what and I think the EU, I think the Commission would much prefer, is a good, harmonious working relationship. Of course we would. But we can't leave these things undone. Mm-hmm. And we've got this kind of standstill, which can't continue indefinitely without a kind of a framework for it. And as I say, if we can do it through negotiation, great. But the bill is there for a reason.
Now, you met Anthony Blinken, was it last week?
I lose track. It feels like last year, but I think it probably was last week.
And was there any sense that the standoff over the protocol is going to affect our relations with the United States?
I had a great meeting with Tony Blinken. A really, really good meeting. Of course we discuss it. The Americans take this very seriously. They feel very emotionally connected to it. So of course he brought it up. But it certainly wasn't the first thing he mentioned, and it certainly wasn't the only thing he mentioned. And when we did discuss it, it was a discussion that was very friendly, very amicable. I think the Americans are very keen for us to resolve this as well. So everyone wants to get this done. I mean, there's no one that wants to be the dog in the manger about this. We all want to get this done. But we have seen a really, really strong relationship with the United States of America on a whole range of issues. Not just Russia and Ukraine, but on a whole range of issues spanning pretty much all the time zones of the globe.
And does it matter, therefore, that it looks like we're not going to be able to secure that trade deal with them?
Well, a trade deal with America, it is a very big country with a wide range of economic activities, a very strong and vocal agricultural sector. A trade deal with America was always going to be big and complicated, and therefore, by definition, was never going to be quick. I know there's a kind of a retrofit of history that Brexit was all about securing a trade deal with America. That I campaigned for Brexit. I don't ever remember, and I'm willing to be embarrassed if someone's going to do a Google search. I don't ever remember saying you need to vote for Brexit so we can get a trade deal with America. But the point is, I've been to the States. I've been to the political East Coast. But I've also been to Middle America. I went to Jefferson City, Missouri. I went to Chicago. Been to other bits of the US. And the mood music is very much they want to do more with us. They want to do more trade with us. And if we can't, an overarching trade deal with the US is like eating an elephant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that famous thing, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah. So we can get if we get a state by state level agreements on some areas, sectorial agreements in other areas, address as Liz did when she was trade secretary, have a very profitable, vibrant trading relationship with the US. So look, we will keep on. I know Kemi will do this as trade secretary, and I will absolutely be there on her shoulder to support her doing this. We will keep improving our trading relations with the US because it is in our mutual interests so to do.
Now, you took over the Foreign Office at a unique moment, and you had to watch how that department and the civil service in general dealt with the events following the passing of the Queen. We were impressed by the way the civil service handled all that.
It was. So I know there is a popular and slightly lazy stereotype of the civil service, being full of Sir Humphreys that find terribly elegant and polite ways of basically saying no minister rather than yes minister. So I've never really bought into that. I've found that the civil service, same for my time in the reserve forces, same my time in business. If you give clear instructions based on well thought through planning, they will perform. And what I saw through that period of time after the sad death of Her late Majesty was a very well thought through, well articulated plan, Operation London Bridge, delivered brilliantly. It was part of my job to host foreign dignitaries from all around the world, and over and over and over again I had variations on the same conversation, on the same theme, which is, wow, you guys have done this so brilliantly. This is done so well. This is so elegant. Her Majesty's funeral was such a well delivered, incredibly complicated. I mean, the scale of this was huge, and yet what we saw was quietly, efficiently, effectively, elegantly delivered, and the world was hugely impressed. And that was done because all bits of the machine, uniformed public servants, civil servants, politicians, society as a whole, all pulled together and showed what we can do as an amazing, great country.
I mean, that being said, over the last 12 months or so, the Foreign Office has come in for an awful lot of criticism, both about the way the merger with DFID was handled and about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Do you think lessons have been learned on both scores?
Yeah, and I was a minister in the Foreign Office through both those sets of activities, and they were unprecedented, both of them, and of course lessons are constantly being learnt, and the FCDO is and must always be a learning organisation, and we change and we evolve, and people don't always get absolutely everything right, and of course the weird thing about foreign affairs is there is so much that we do that is invisible, because you don't see the thing that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so our engagement with our partners overseas, in order to prevent that bad thing happening, when successful, no one sees it. Mm-hmm. You know, and you know, we're never going to get a kind of a splash across a newspaper saying today in the world nothing bad happened.
Yeah.
You know, you don't get that luxury. But my job is to try as far as possible to make that headline come true. And when bad things do happen in the world, we've got to learn from them. And you know, the thing with foreign affairs is that the world is an unpredictable place, and we've got to be agile. We've got to be we've got to be agile. We're constantly learning, constantly evolving. That's the nature of the department. But like, it's an excellent department. It is a fantastic department. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'm constantly amazed by the quality of people that we attract and retain into the FCDO. And you know, I want always for my department to be seen as the first choice department for new recruits. I always want to have the pick of the litter when it comes to future civil servants. I see surprisingly young people working around the globe on our behalf, sometimes very publicly, sometimes working in the shadows to help keep us safe. And they are amazing people. I adore working with them.
Are there efficiency savings that can be made in the Foreign Office, do you think?
Look, any organisation that thinks it cannot make efficiency savings needs to have a big dose of efficiency savings applied to it. Because of course you can, because the world changes, and you've got to recognise where things that we had done previously are no longer optimal, whether we need to do things differently. So of course we've got to have those conversations. Look, money's tight right across government, and we can squeal about that all we like. And you know, Adam, if you turn around to me and say, look, James, would you like your budget doubled? Yeah, of course I would. Who wouldn't? There's always things that I can do, and I think we could use more money efficiently and well. But the bottom line is that money's too tight to mention, and we've got to deal with that reality. We've got to work efficiently and well, and we've got to make sure that when the growth plan that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister put in place, when that starts delivering more money into the public purse, as it will, because you've got to go for growth. If you don't have a plan for growth, you don't have a plan for government. So when that money starts coming back through, I will be able to use that efficiently and well. And in the meantime, we've got to look for ways of cutting our cloth to match our purse and delivering excellence in foreign affairs on a tighter budget.
Brilliant. I think that's probably enough for me for the moment. So I think we've got about 20 minutes left. There are there are microphones going around. So we've started these two ladies here in the middle, and then we'll come over to that. Are you happy to take a couple at a time?
Now, if I said no,
If you said no, we'll take them one at a time.
Yeah, a couple at a time. Thank you. I've got a couple at a time.
Hello, Foreign Secretary. I'm Alex from Womankind Worldwide. Womankind Worldwide.
Right, cool.
So, along with others here in the development sector, we're very pleased to see a development minister in the FCDO and in cabinet. How do you see this change affecting the way development organisations like ours can engage with the FCDO? And how do you see yourself as Secretary of State of the department? How involved do you see yourself in development matters?
Yeah, thank you. So, two at a time.
Yeah. Well, you're the boss. I mean, you can.
No, sorry, two at a time. Let's go for two at a time. Go on.
Hi, thank you. It's been fantastic listening to you. I'm Claudia Craig from the International Rescue Committee. Your previous Foreign Secretary, and now Prime Minister, committed to putting women and girls at the heart of the UK's foreign policy. I wanted to know if that would still be the case under your leadership and what that looks like to you, and specifically what working with and investing in local and women-led organisations on the ground would look like to you as Foreign Secretary. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And thanks for that pair of questions, because they do kind of flow one from the other. So Alex, I'll start with yours. So I watched the merger happen, and I know there was some disquiet in the development sector that that somehow our development work would be deprioritised. I mean, I see it very much the other way round. That development has absolutely got to be part of our international posture. Development, diplomacy, defence, security, these things are all interwoven, and I was always uncomfortable with development being seen as a kind of a branch line or an appendix to UK foreign policy. So before I was a minister, I was at an event where a Commonwealth High Commissioner, and I won't mention the name of the country, but a Commonwealth High Commissioner basically said, if I try to get through to the British government, it's almost impossible to get through, with the exception of DFID. I don't want my country to be seen as a charity case and nothing but. And that was, for me, one of the slight problems with having DFID separate from foreign policy. Development policy and foreign policy are absolutely intertwined. They must be always thought of in the same breath. When it comes to our policy for women and girls internationally, it is absolutely still embedded in our thinking. The Prime Minister said so when she was Foreign Secretary. The former Prime Minister said so when he was Foreign Secretary. I think the line, Boris's line was like, the education of women and girls is the Swiss Army knife of world problems. And it's absolutely true. When I did Women, Peace and Security as a portfolio when I was a minister. I also did Defence and Security when I was a minister. And it's absolutely true that when women are involved in the peace process, you get better results, you get them quicker, and they endure more. Yeah. So even the most misogynistic Neanderthal idiot that was trying to, and that's not a self-description, right? If you're trying to get the right result, even if you personally think it's a daft idea, the evidence dictates that getting women around the table at the heart of decision making at the beginning of it's just the right thing to do. Sexism be damned, it's just incredibly pragmatic. So yes, it will, as far as I'm concerned, be an enduring part of our foreign policy.
There's a gentleman in the front row, a lady in the second row, and hundreds of others we'll try and get to. Can you keep your questions as short as possible, please?
I'll try and type my answers as well, sorry.
George Grills from The Times. We've seen hardline voices in Russia in recent days demanding the use of tactical nuclear weapons. We've seen equipment being moved around Russia. How concerned are you by Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon? And even if you can't confirm, because of strategic ambiguity, how it would respond, can you confirm there would be a response that would come at a cost to Russia?
There's a lady.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Simona Liskvar, Ambassador of Slovenia here. You talk about the values, the shared values that we need to defend together. What about the trust? So, in your views, how we can reverse this cycle of lacking of trust, domestically, internationally, between the countries? So what would be your recipe to do that? And you talk about the EU, you talk about the cooperation against Russia, but also about the development aid that UK is cutting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, George, you've kind of slightly preempted my answer with regard to what our response would be. I think it would inevitably be the case that the use of nuclear weapons by any country anywhere in the world would not go without a response. As you say, of course, I'm not going to discuss the nature or the threshold or whatever. But the simple truth is that what we have seen in Vladimir Putin's decision making is that he has made just so many strategic errors. He has caused huge damage to the Russian economy through his invasion of Ukraine. He's finding himself increasingly isolated on the world stage. It's really difficult to accurately assess what Russian public opinion is like, but we're seeing footage coming out of the realization when you impose mass conscription on a population, the realization that the conflict is not going well. You cannot hide that stuff. And increasingly what we need to do is we need to make it very clear that his sequence of strategic errors has got to stop. As I say, I'm obviously not going to go into details about that, but we've seen his narrative. I said at the UN Security Council 2 weeks ago that we'd have these sham referenda with faked results as a justification for annexation, and then the claim that this is actually territorial Russia, which then gives him a legitimacy for escalation. We said those things would happen. We highlighted the deceit of those activities at the UN Security Council, and of course, as we have done so with the invasion, since the invasion, we will continue to support the Ukrainians in the defence of their homeland and stand up for the international rules and norms which have underpinned the post-Second War settlement. With regard to trust, you're right. I mean, there has been so much. There has been so much. I mean, I don't want to make everything about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but we do see there is a significant degree of distrust between populations and politicians. That's been around for a while. It's not completely new. There's, I think I remember seeing a graph which asked the British people the question, do you agree or disagree with the statement that politicians are in it for themselves, not in for the national interest? And something around 60% of respondents said the British government politicians are in it for themselves, not the national interest. And you might say, well, cynical world that we live in, cynical times. That was taken in 1940. In the middle of the Second World War, when British people thought politicians, I'm not sure they're in the national interest. So there's always been a degree of cynicism and distrust between politicians and the people that we serve. I'd love to see that reduced. I think we should try and reduce that. I think there's a lot of disinformation, propaganda and disinformation which is being utilised. I know because I've had this conversation with a number of our friends in Eastern Europe, that is a particular challenge for Russian disinformation going into populations in Eastern Europe, and we will absolutely help through our bilateral relationships to counter that. And you talk about the development expenditure, and as I say, that is being squeezed because the economic situation that we find ourselves in means we have to find ways to use that most efficiently as possible until we can get to the point where that budget starts going back up again.
So from the New York Times. Two things, if I may. One, how likely is Britain to move its embassy to Jerusalem, and what will be the advantage in doing so? And secondly, on the protocol, Steve Baker apologised for the behaviour of Brexit supporters the other night. What are we to make of that? Do you feel the need to do the same? And is there a possibility now of a reset in terms of getting a deal on the protocol?
The first, sorry, two at a time.
Is there anyone else?
There was two questions. So 2 questions. I'll do them.
There's at least 2 questions.
Cheeky. So on moving the embassy, we are looking at that. The Prime Minister's commissioned some work to look at that. It would be rather foolish of me to sit here and say, oh, here's the pros and cons, here's the advantages and disadvantages, when I've got a whole bunch of experts back at the FCDO doing that piece of work on my behalf. So if you excuse me, I'm going to wait for that piece of work to come back, and then I can discuss the advantages, disadvantages, and the pros and cons. With regard to the protocol, I think it's very honourable for someone to say, actually, you know what, the conversation got a little bit heated just now. Let's try and take some of the heat out of the conversation and focus on what is in our mutual interest. So I think it's great that Steve said, actually, you know what, things were said And we can do one of two things. We can either keep harking back to the point in time where there was most friction and most disagreement, or we can start heading forward to a point in time where there is less disagreement and less friction. I think what Steve is implicitly saying is, let's look forward, not look backwards. And I think that is a very, very sensible thing to say.
Thank you. We're going to take, if you can take the gentleman there and the lady to his right. So the gentleman with the pink shirt with his hand up, and the lady to his right, and then we'll try and fit in as many of the others in as we can.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary Paul Brennan from Al Jazeera English, the TV channel. What is your assessment of the role of the UN Security Council, given the problems that we have with Russia at the moment and its position on that council?
Thank you. I'm Romilly Greenhill from the One campaign. Really welcome to what you said about values-based foreign policy, Foreign Secretary. And I think one of the values most of us would share was around people not dying from diseases that don't kill them in this country, for example, HIV/AIDS. And I think there's a really important opportunity coming up for the UK around your pledge to the Global Fund for AIDS, TB and malaria. It's really welcome. We've seen African countries stepping up. We've seen our G7 partners, almost all of them, stepping up quite considerably. And so I'm really interested in your views as, is this a good opportunity for the UK to demonstrate that values-based policy?
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Your question on the UN Security Council. Look, obviously in the current circumstances, having Russia as a P5 member of the Security Council massively limits the formal decisions that the UN Security Council can make. But I was sat around the table in New York just over a week ago at the UN Security Council, and the various countries making their interventions. Lavrov came in just before making his intervention, made his intervention, and then just as I started speaking immediately after him, shuffled up his papers and scurried out of the room because he knew what he saw what had been said before he arrived, and he knew what I was going to say and others were going to say, and he didn't want to be in the room whilst pretty much every member of the UN Security Council in one way or another criticised Russia's actions. So in terms of kind of their hard veto, that is an issue. Exactly how we deal with that, I don't want to speculate too much at the moment, but I do think we need to have a look at that. But in terms of its kind of its soft power versus hard power, it still has a voice. The world can see when countries are isolated, and we saw the votes of the United Nations shortly afterwards, and everyone can see that Russia is very, very, very isolated. So it still has an important function, even though the way it's structured causes problems with regard to Russian veto. With regard to the Global Fund, it's an incredibly important piece of work. We do take it incredibly seriously. Obviously, as I said, I keep making reference to it. Like money is tight. Money is really tight. There are more calls. There are more great things that we would want to support than we have money to support. This is a really important piece of work. We do take it incredibly seriously. I'm not able to kind of announce what our commitment would be just at the moment.
Gentleman with the glasses, lady before her.
Hi, Alice Smart from Reuters news agency. Given the more positive mood music around the protocol, do you think getting an agreement is a matter of days, a matter of weeks, or a matter of months? Thanks.
Hi, Cindy Yu from The Spectator. Secretary of State, last year The Spectator found that there were only 40 people in the Foreign Office who spoke Mandarin to the highest levels, and I've spoken to people in the Russian policy world who say that there's a similar problem with capability to understand Russia. What will you do as Foreign Secretary to improve that understanding, linguistic and cultural and political, of our greatest challenges?
Cool. Alistair, you said, will it take days, weeks or months? I'm rather disappointed you didn't start off with like seconds, minutes or hours. I don't know how long it's going to take. as you say, the tone, I think, has improved. That's always a good sign. I think there is a recognition that it's in our collective interest to get this resolved. That is a good sign. That is a good sign. And you know, when it comes to a negotiated settlement, as I said, you know, we've got the bill making its way through Parliament. That will move at the pace that a bill moves through. So I don't know exactly when that would get royal assent, but the bottom line is that if the Commission wants to get a negotiated settlement ahead of that bill coming into force, we know that we are talking about, you know, some weeks rather than many months. Yeah. So that kind of gives us a bit of a framework. We're in a good place. We've got a pretty good idea of the direction of travel, and we've got a kind of idea about the timescales that we're working on. I think those are actually really quite good ingredients to get something across the line. So Cindy, with regard to better understanding of China, now one of the things I might suggest is people listen to a podcast called Chinese Whispers, which will give them a wonderful insight. Anand, coming out here. Who does Chinese Whispers? Who does Chinese Whispers? Oh, you do Chinese Whispers. Look, I mean, it's I think a better understanding. I was down in Singapore, and it was really interesting listening to our friends in East and Southeast Asia talk about their relationship with China, talk about the history of China, talk about their assessment of China's world view, about why some behaviours that we might look at with confusion and astonishment on the most through another prism seem very obvious and predictable things. As I said, you know, we have amazing people at the FCDO. I think language skills really matter. Look, I don't have language skills. A couple of people have seen my catastrophic attempts at Arabic and frankly worse attempts at German. And I recognise you can't really know a country or a people's without really knowing the language of that country or that people, which is why language skills in the FCDO are so incredibly important. But you know, really experienced linguists are a small pool and very competed for. So we're going to have to find a way to compete. But implicit in your question is it's really important we have a really not superficial but deep understanding of the history and the culture and the society and the motivations of the countries around the world that we are working with in whatever form that relationship is. It helps avoid errors and misjudgments, and it helps find a way of unlocking some of the challenges and problems that we face. Bit of a long answer because it's not an easy question to answer, but you're right, these are things that we have to invest in.
Well, it was an answer that took us right to the end of our time, I'm afraid. The hour has flown by. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your questions. Thank you most of all, Foreign Secretary, for taking the time, particularly ahead of your big speech, for which good luck this afternoon. It's been fascinating. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.